Throughout the NBA's history, it has seen over 4,500 total players appear. It's seen over 78 years of play. Over 700 players have been crowned NBA champions. It's seen 111 Hall of Famers. And yet, you guys task me of choosing the 10 most elite, prestigious, and decorated players to ever lace up in the NBA. I mean, this is like picking 10 needles out of a haystack. The top 10 greatest NBA players of all time list is a very, did I mention the word very? Astronomically challenging list to appear on. And in today's video, we're going to fully and accurately fill out this list of 10 players. And I'm not going to just throw together a half-assed list and ramble on about nothing. We're going to answer this question by looking at as many perspectives on it as possible, using as many categories of different basketball and objective numbers to come up with the flawless top 10 players ever list. So the first step into coming up with an objective and concrete answer to this question is to give you guys some context about these all-time greats. And I'm sure you guys are mostly familiar with what these legends did on the court. We're going to look at a few metrics of production and achievements. But before we go any further, this is how this is going to work. I found some of the stats and awards of 14 handpicked elite NBA players, and I'm going to ruthlessly compare them against each other. These 14 players are Bill Russell, Hakeem Olajuwon, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Kevin Durant, Kobe Bryant, Larry Bird, LeBron James, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, Oscar Robertson, Shaquille O'Neal, Steph Curry, Tim Duncan, and Wilt Chamberlain. And as much as I'd like to include many more players into this debate as possible, these 14 players are the only real players at the time this video is recorded that actually have a strong enough case for being a top 10 player ever. So the first category I want to give you guys some context about is basic stats, and it looks a little something like this. Right here we have a chart that shows the basic stats of each of these 14 players. The stats you guys are familiar with, like points, assists, rebounds, steals, blocks, field goal percentage, free throw percentage. As you can see, all of these players stuff the stat sheet on a daily basis. But who's really the best here? Well, what I did to give us some direction is added the total of the 5 counting stats, points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks, and subtracted the turnovers from that number to get values that look just like this. But there's something wrong here. Older players like Bill, Wilt, and Oscar all didn't have stats like steals, blocks, and turnovers when they played. And this is a problem we're going to run into during several of these categories we're going to talk about. Although it kind of sucks that these players didn't have these certain stats around in their day, and it would be more fair to judge them off of just points, rebounds, and assists. But in this instance, I think it would also be unfair for the rest of the players not to use these newer stats. So the older greats might suffer a little bit here, but we can just kind of assume what kind of production they would have put up. But anyways, back to the totals here. This is them reordered from highest to lowest score. Despite Bill, Oscar, and Wilt not having steals and blocks, all of them still placed in the top 4. Something to mention about these stats from the older players, especially in the 60s, is that the pace of play during their era was astronomically higher than it is today, meaning more shot attempts, passes, rebound chances, which inflates their numbers. If I were to re-rank them, weighing in on both production, efficiency, and the era that they played in, I would re-rank them like this. Wilt Chamberlain still, in my opinion, has the greatest career stat line of all time. 30 points and 23 rebounds for a career is crazy. Next I have MJ with 36-5 and 2 steals, followed by LeBron with an impressive 27, 7 and 7. Next I have Oscar with a smooth 25, 7 and 9, and then Kareem with 24, 11 and 2.6 blocks. I brought Bill Russell all the way down to 8, despite him averaging a whopping 22 rebounds a night. He's mainly this low because he only averaged 15 points a game while playing with possession counts as high as 136.3 a night. Mind you, the average possession count per game in 2023 is only 99, so you can see how his numbers are inflated a little bit. Magic, Hakeem, Shaq, Curry, and KD all make up the mid to bottom range. Tim Duncan actually placed last in this chart, despite putting up 19, 10, and 2 blocks for his career, which just goes to show you how impressive everyone's stat lines are. Now let's take it up a notch further and look at advanced stats, the stats that show impact, value, effectiveness, and production the best. The next set of metrics we're going to talk about is advanced stats, and like I mentioned before, these numbers show value, impact, effectiveness, and overall player production the best. We're going to take a look at 7 key advanced stats. Win shares per 48, which shows the amount of win shares a player accumulates per 48 minutes on average. So how much of an average win do they contribute to? True shooting percentage, which is a shooting split that factors in 3-pointers, 2-pointers, and free throws. Value over replacement, which shows how valuable a player is compared to the average NBA player. PER, which is a stat that standardizes per minute production. And finally, box plus minus, which combines box score stats to provide a value that shows a player's overall on-court impact. And of course, offensive and defensive box plus minus are just the offensive and defensive versions of box plus minus. Both of them combined added up to the total box plus minus. And this is what all the 14 players' advanced stats looks like. It once again kind of sucks that these stats didn't exist back in the 60s, like any of the box plus minus or value over replacement, but we still do have win shares per 48 and PER to judge them off of. It's pretty clear that all of these players have out of this world production, value, and effectiveness, but if I were to re-rank them based on these stats from best to worst, considering eras, efficiency, and just overall the best stats, I would rearrange them like this. I think it's pretty clear that Michael Jordan takes the crown here for advanced stats. The man has the highest win share per 48 of all time, has the highest PER of all time, and the second highest box plus minus of all time. At number 2, I went with LeBron James, who is just a step below MJ in production, but is still amazing. Third, I went with Wilt Chamberlain, who, based off sheerly win shares per 48 and PER, is second and third on our list. And I could only imagine how high his other stats would have looked if they were around at the time. At number 4, I have Kareem, who it may not look like he deserves this spot, but you have to remember this guy was doing this for 20 years, and 5th place Magic Johnson only has about 11 good years. And then Shaq, Larry Bird, and Kevin Durant all placed 6th, 7th, and 8th. What honestly surprised me when finding these numbers was how lackluster Kobe Bryant's advanced stats really are. I mean, they're not bad, but he has the lowest win shares per 48 on this list, the lowest box plus minus, lowest defensive box plus minus. Matter of fact, he's actually negative there, lowest value over replacement, and has a relatively low true shooting percentage in PER. The achievements and accolades a player has won throughout their career is a really telling sign of the success they found and the greatness they withhold. We're going to be comparing the individual awards that every player in this discussion has won. The awards we're going to look at are Finals MVPs, Defensive Player of the Years, All NBA appearances, All-Star appearances, All Defensive Team selections, and scoring titles. Right here, this chart shows every award that all of these 14 players won. And on the right, we have the total number of these awards added together. This list would show that Michael Jordan is the most accomplished player of all time, followed by Kareem at 2, LeBron at 3, and Kobe at 4. But I want to add a little twist to this. I think it's pretty obvious to say that not all awards are built the same. You can't honestly tell me that winning the Finals MVP is on the same level as an All-Star appearance, or a defensive player is on the same level as an all-defensive team selection. So to compensate for this gap of value in different awards, I decided to give 2.5 points per every one MVP and one Finals MVP, and 2 points for every Defensive Player of the Year. Pretty simple. This change makes the totals look slightly different. The top 3 stays the same. Duncan and Kobe switch spots from 4 to 5. So does Hakeem and Shaq with 6 and 7. KD falls down 2 spots and Magic goes up 1. Russell goes up 1 and Curry and Oscar get flipped. It really sucks that these awards like Finals MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, and All Defensive Team weren't around when Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, and Oscar Robertson were playing, because Wilt and Bill especially would be racking up so many of these awards, but I think it's unfair for the rest of the all-time greats to assume that they would have won these awards automatically. So we're just going to go off with what we have here. But this is how I would rank these players against each other in terms of individual achievements. Now, before I show you guys my final rankings, I want to show you guys one more chart to really help you give context about these players. And this isn't the normal chart with numbers and stats, but this chart shows a letter grade on how great each of these 14 players were in the 6 different categories. 3 of them we've already talked about: basic stats, advanced stats, and awards. The 4th category is team success. This is pretty self-explanatory. And the 5th and 6th categories are both very challenging to quantify with purely numbers, which is why I like the letter grading system. It's the famous eye test and legacy. The eye test is exactly what it sounds like. If you were to only watch these players with no context about their championships, individual awards, and stats, how would you rank them? And legacy. Legacy is a word in the world of sports that you hear a lot. How does this decision affect this player's legacy? I would define legacy in basketball as the achievements and impacts a player made throughout their career and how they'll be remembered because of them. So things that a player can do to positively affect their legacy is consistently win championships, consistently win big time awards, having some unforgettable career-defining moments that no one else can replicate, make unforgettable impacts on the game of basketball, stay away from as much negativity throughout your career as you can. Of course, easier said than done. And lastly, staying loyal to your original team as long as you're winning. That always helps. So on the flip side, things that can negatively affect your legacy is not winning a championship throughout your career, having a track record of early playoff exits, consistently getting beaten out for big time awards, not having any career-defining moments that no one else can replicate, not making any lasting impacts on the game, surrounding your name inside of negativity, and not being loyal, especially if your previous team was contenders. Okay, anyways, back to this chart. If I had to give a letter ranking for every aspect of these 14 players' games, it would look like this. Now, let's explain this from the worst grade to the best grade. An example of what a C- looks like is Oscar Robertson's team success. He only won 1 ring and had a lot of early playoff exits in his career. There's actually no C's on here. A C+ looks something like Wilt Chamberlain's team success or Oscar Robertson's individual awards. A B- looks like Wilt Chamberlain's legacy with countless early playoff exits despite him putting up incredible stats, and KD's team success. A B looks like Steph Curry's advanced stats, Larry Bird's team success, or the eye test for Tim Duncan. A B+, which is by far the most common grade on here, looks something like Kobe's basic stats, Shaq's legacy, Hakeem's eye test, or LeBron's team success. An A- looks like Larry Bird's advanced stats, Tim Duncan's awards, Kareem's team success, or Magic's legacy. An A looks like Jordan's basic stats, LeBron's advanced stats, the eye test for Kobe, and Kareem's awards. And finally, an A+, the closest to a perfect grade without actually being perfect, looks like Wilt Chamberlain's basic stats, MJ's advanced stats, MJ's awards, Bill Russell's team success, the eye test for Jordan, and Bill Russell's legacy. So I think we've covered enough context to really be ready for the final reveal of these rankings. After going through all the stats, awards, player grades, I'm sure you guys are more than ready to see these ranks. So let's start from the bottom and make our way up. At our number 14 spot, I think it really comes to no surprise that Oscar Robertson places here. Besides the man having competitive stats with the other 13 players, that's really the only argument for the Big O. He finishes below average in terms of individual accolades. He has 1 MVP and 0 Finals MVPs. The only player on this list not to have a Finals MVP, besides Bill, who would have had them if they were around. The man only has 1 ring, which also places dead last here on this list. He has a subpar legacy and eye test compared to the rest. While Oscar Robertson was the number 1 option on the Cincinnati Royals, he proved that he couldn't lead the team to a ring. So at no surprise, Oscar Robertson places 14th here. At my number 13 and 12 spots, I'm putting Hakeem and then KD. Despite Kevin Durant literally being a 7-foot sniper that can score anywhere on the court, an MVP, a 2-time Finals MVP, and a 4-time scoring champion, I would place Hakeem slightly higher in front of him. Hakeem, although he was never at the same level that KD was on offense, was miles ahead of him on defense, with 2 Defensive Player of the Years, 9 All-Defensive teams, and far superior defensive stats. Hakeem is arguably the greatest defender of all time. And on top of that, Hakeem proved that he could lead the team that drafted him to 2 championships without having to leave or needing a super team around him. But both of these players placed below the top 10 because they simply just lack the basketball resume and metrics that some of these next players have. At our number 11 and 10 spots, we have Steph Curry and Wilt Chamberlain. Now, these two are both very close, but I'm going to give the slight edge to Curry here. Wilt Chamberlain was a literal demigod in basketball shoes. He has arguably the greatest production value we've seen from a basketball player ever, but unfortunately for him, there's more to greatness than just stats. You see, Wilt Chamberlain has a lot of holes in his basketball greatness case. He spent the majority of the 60s getting his ass kicked by Bill Russell and the Celtics, despite putting up unreal stats. Speaking of stats, Wilt Chamberlain's numbers took a noticeable dip in the playoffs, which further proves how this guy is like the Joel Embiid of the 60s. Well, kinda. Wilt Chamberlain only managed to beat Bill Russell and the Celtics one time when the team was getting old in 1967, and Wilt won once more with Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, and the Lakers. Along with that, Wilt was consistently getting beat out for the MVP when both him and Russell were in their primes. I placed Steph Curry ahead of him because, while he doesn't have the monstrous stats Wilt had, he has 4 championships with the team that drafted him, 2 of which he was by far the best player on the team. He was a far superior skilled player, has incredible longevity. He's still putting up 30 points a game at the age of 35, and he revolutionized the 3-point shot like no one else. Alright, moving on from these two, we have the 7, 8, and 9 spots, which I place Shaq, Larry Bird, and Bill Russell at. While Shaq didn't quite have the longevity and offensive skill like Curry, Shaq was by far the better player in his prime and had a more impressive basketball resume. I put Bill Russell ahead of these two for the obvious reason why. This guy has more rings than he has fingers. Bill Russell's 11 rings is by far the greatest achievement in NBA history, a mark that I'm almost certain will never be broken. Bill Russell was also arguably the greatest defender of all time, and arguably the greatest rebounder of all time. Along with that, him and the Celtics were so influential for the fast-paced style of basketball and use of transition that we're all accustomed to in the current NBA. But a big reason why he isn't any higher in my opinion is his offensive game was subpar at best, and he had consistently high-level talent around him his whole career. Bill Russell, for his career, averaged only 15 points a game, which would translate to about 12 points a game in today's pace of play. And he only shot 44% from the field while being a big, and shot 56% from the free throw line, which is honestly underwhelming. It's pretty clear that Larry Bird and Shaq can't compete with Russell in terms of championships and defensive presence. Now, Shaq and Larry Bird are a lot closer than people think. Both had a sky-high peak that only few have ever reached. Both players have been by far the best player on 3 championship teams. Both players were literally superstars as soon as they joined the league. But both players have pros and cons to their games. You could argue that Shaq had more titles than Larry Bird, but during 2006 when Shaq got his 4th ring in Miami, he was literally getting benched in the finals because he couldn't hit a free throw. Shaq's production and value on the court really started to taper down once he joined Miami. I think Larry Bird was just the better overall player. He was one of the early pioneers for the 3-point shot. He was a better scorer than Shaq, a better playmaker, a more versatile defender, and better at defending his position than Shaq. But I really think it's scary how similar of careers both of these two players had. The next 3 players we're going to look at are the 4, 5, and 6 spots, and I have them in that same order of Magic Johnson, Tim Duncan, and Kobe Bryant. I have Kobe Bryant lower than these 2 players for a reason. Despite Kobe Bryant being one of the greatest scorers the game has ever seen, one of the greatest perimeter defenders, and just being one of the most iconic NBA legends of all time, I would place him lower than both Tim Duncan and Magic Johnson for a couple of reasons. First off, something that really brings down Kobe's all-time status is that his first 3 championships, he wasn't even the best player on those teams. So he really only has 2 rings where he was the focal point of the offense. We haven't really seen anything like that from any other player on this list, well, except maybe Steph Curry. Another big reason that Kobe doesn't place higher on this list than these 2 players is his stats were just on a lower level than Tim and Magic's. I think it's pretty clear from the earlier parts of this video that Kobe's advanced stats were simply on a lower level compared to Duncan and Magic, and while his basic stats were pretty good, averaging an impressive 25, 5, 5, and 1.4 steals a game, let's just be honest, this guy was doing it on subpar efficiency. I believe Tim Duncan should be ranked higher all time than Kobe. Duncan beats out Kobe in individual achievements. He has 1 more Finals MVP, 1 more MVP, 3 more All-Defensive Team selections, while having almost the same career length. And once again, I would argue that Duncan's efficiency and production was better than Kobe's. Duncan was also consistently winning throughout his career while being the number 1 player on his team. Tim Duncan's the only player to ever win a ring in 3 different decades. I think the argument for Kobe versus Duncan is much more analytical, while the argument for Magic versus both of these players is a lot less objective, but relies more on aspects like impact and legacy. Magic Johnson, despite getting drafted into an already solid franchise and having talent around him throughout his whole career, he is, in my opinion, the 4th best player of all time. Not only were his basic and advanced stats incredible, not only did he achieve a lot individually during his career, but I think the greatest argument for Magic Johnson was the impact that he left in the NBA. Magic Johnson completely reinvented what flashiness and electrifying offense looks like in the NBA. He was just a sorcerer out there with the basketball. He came into into the Lakers organization as a rookie, won the Finals MVP, and led them to 5 championships in 9 seasons. No one else outside of Bill Russell has done that. Magic Johnson and the Lakers quite literally saved the NBA from declining ticket sales, horrendous TV ratings, and a reputation that was on a steady down spiral. I don't want to drag this out any more than it has to be, but if you guys are interested in how the NBA was going downhill and how the likes of Magic Johnson and Bird saved it, I'll link the video right here. But let's move on to the top 3. So at number 3, to really no surprise here, I have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. The man, until LeBron James showed up, redefined what longevity looked like in an NBA superstar. When looking at this man's basketball resume, he really has no weaknesses. All the stats and production and efficiency you could ask for, all the awards and accolades. He has 5 championships and 3 finals MVPs. He was the league's leading scorer until recently. But to really crack the top 2, you need to do something in basketball so incredible, so unheard of, that people on a daily basis quite literally doubt if you're human or not. And I think Michael Jordan and LeBron James both fit this category very well. Now, I'm going to try my best to not make this a long and dragged out GOAT debate that I'm sure you guys already hear about enough. But to really sum it up, Michael Jordan in his prime was simply the better basketball player, and all the evidence points towards this claim. The man was simply more valuable and produced more both on offense and on defense than LeBron James in his prime. Along with that, Jordan has more individual achievements like MVPs, Finals MVPs, Defensive Player of the Years, etc., and found more team success. It's really only longevity that LeBron has over Jordan. But if you guys still haven't heard enough about this debate, I actually created a super detailed video on all the different aspects of this ongoing GOAT debate, using objective metrics just like the one in this video to come to a claim, and I'll link it right now.